Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, the Cellarcast, episode 162. I am feeling a lot better now. I think in the last podcast, my sleep has been just garbage for the last, 2 or 3 weeks or so. That's why this video is taking so long, because that's the thing no one tells you about, well, I'm sure people will tell you about, being your own boss, is that you have to I feel a little bit jealous sometimes because I'm just staring. I can't think of, my brain is just not working. I'm just I'm looking at my screen, and all I want is man, I'm so jealous of people who just have someone who tells them what to do, and then they just do it more or less with some sort of external pressure. Internal pressure, that works just fine if you have, the energy and the discipline and all that. But when you just kind of wake up and you don't feel good, and you don't feel good the whole day, and you're just always groggy, and your eyes feel sore, and your eyes have felt sore for 3 or 4 days straight, man, it's a lot harder to well up that energy to do stuff. But I'm feeling better now. And speaking of YouTube, I did some very funny YouTube specific stuff. So here's a funny thing about me. I don't think I've ever had health insurance. I've had it maybe once for a couple months for one reason or another, and then I didn't have it for one reason or another, and I haven't had it for 90% of my life. 95% of my life. I haven't had health insurance. And I was thinking maybe I should just try to remedy that, It's not the most pressing thing for me at the moment, I'm not going to die or anything, but it's, maybe a good idea. And luckily, because I live in California, they have a number of state-sponsored healthcare plans for people who don't have a lot of income. Because I have a very, unique situation in that all of my housing is taken care of, but I don't, and food and stuff, but I also I'm not dipping into the family bank account to buy stuff, right? I pretty much, outside of my basic needs being met, I'm pretty much just what I make off of, Patreon, just off of my YouTube channel. So that's and I'm self-employed, so that's it's a weird financial situation, and it's even weirder to describe it to an automated system that is not used to dealing with people like me. So there is one such program that I was able to qualify for to just get me all I need is just a basic, get a physical twice a year, maybe, I don't know if they cover dental insurance, but that would be nice. Thankfully I have no medications that I have to take. I don't have any big pre-existing conditions or specialists I have to go see. I am thankfully pretty blank in terms of being interesting from a medical standpoint. So I'm able to get just a very basic, physician, I guess. But in order to first get fully qualified for my application to go through, I had to send them a proof of my income, and that was trickier than you might expect. Because the way that they have on their whole questionnaire form online, they've got okay, well, what do you do, and who is your employer? And I have to say myself. But I have, what is your job? I have a YouTube channel, and this has been a process that, like every single government process, has taken a very long time. So I sent like the initial thing, and then some caseworker. I have a caseworker because I'm a very important person. I have my own caseworker. Reviewed it and like tried to interpret it, and what they came up with was that they thought that I worked for YouTube, and they needed like pay stubs from YouTube. And I had to call someone today, and I was like, yeah, no, that's not like how it works. And I'm like, I get paid through Patreon. And she was like, what? And I'm like, oh no, okay. Okay, so they really don't know what. Okay, I got some explaining to do. I was like, well, no, I'm not employed by YouTube. I'm self-employed with a YouTube channel, but I don't get money from YouTube. Like, YouTube is my job, but I don't get money from them, and I don't work for them. I get money via a third-party platform called Patreon that pays me via PayPal. So we had to add some extra notes to my thing for the caseworker who's going to review it. I hopefully got it sorted out with, like, Patreon does supply spreadsheets. Also, I haven't filled out a tax form yet, because of the IRS being very funny and saying, actually, we're not going to send you a tax form. We're not gonna send you one. We're gonna hold off on sending people in your tax bracket a form until next year, because we moved the threshold to be so low that we forgot how much extra paperwork that would require of us to do. So I'm like, I hope this spreadsheet, it doesn't have my name on it. No, it doesn't have my name on it. No, it doesn't have like an employee, like it's not a pay stub. It's like a spreadsheet that tracks what my like income and payouts were for like month by month. And I can send you a bank statement that will correlate, hopefully, to one of the months. And hopefully this will result in me getting accepted for basic health insurance. If not, I don't know. I guess we'll just wait. I'll just wait like a year or 6 months or something like that until I can actually get my tax forms done and all that, and I can send that as proof, and it'll be much easier, or some bullshit like that. Anyway, funny parts of being a YouTuber. I don't even want to, like, oh god, like I've heard other people who, have to deal with even more adult things than I do describe this problem of, like, I remember some YouTuber on a podcast I was listening to describe the process of them trying to apply for a loan, I think, like a loan on a house or something, and the bank was like, well, how much do you make? And he was like, it depends. Depends month to month. It depends on the views. And they were like, okay, well, who do you work for? He's like, Google. For him, it was, for other people who rely on like ad monetization, it might be even weirder, because it's like, well, Google pays me, but I don't work for them. I'm not a contractor because I don't have a contract with them. You're just gonna have to roll with me on this. And the thing is that despite the fact that being a professional YouTuber has been a thing for a little over 10 years now, a lot of people in a lot of, banks and government programs are not really used to dealing with it. It's a very, very small portion of the population, and it's a pretty unorthodox employment situation, if you can even call it that. So, creates a lot of difficult conversations to figure out Thankfully, the lady on the phone was very receptive and was like, don't worry, we see all sorts of stuff here. So, if everything works out, then you'll see me getting a straight checkup. You'll see me getting a checkup soon, maybe. We didn't have any questions from last time, but if you'd like to leave a question, leave one down in the comments below, and I'll definitely get to it next time. With that, I'm going to jump into a little... I was thinking about this because I did that segment last podcast where I was very rambly, and I was talking about the PS5... How many games does the PS5 actually have? And I broke it down just based off of the Wikipedia article, or the list, I suppose, of PS5 exclusive games. And I kind of went through and by process of elimination, taking out VR games and stuff, remakes and things like new brand new games, not getting PC ports that have released. Like, why would you buy the PS5 at this point over like building something like a gaming PC and all that? And I basically came to the conclusion that the PS5 has 6 games total. It has 6 games, but 3 of them are bad. So really it has like 3 games, and 2 of them are probably getting PC ports. Those being Spider-Man 2 and Rise of the Ronin will most likely be getting PC ports at some point in the future, leaving the only PS5 game to be Astrobot. So I clipped that. I turned that into a clip for the Clips channel, and it randomly blew up. I guess it was a juicy topic, capitalized on the timeliness of the news. And I got a lot of comments from it. Some of them were, I don't know, it's remember how I talked about the Cellarcast system? Right? Of some people who just kind of wander into the Clips channel and all that. It's always really interesting for me because I feel like to an extent I have a sort of insular community across all my channels. It's interesting to me to suddenly get a big injection of people who don't really know anything about me or listen regularly to the podcast or have seen any videos on the main channel, to suddenly like hear their opinions on my opinions. And I honestly, it's not like, oh, everyone had stupid things to say. It wasn't like that. Some of them were kind of interesting, of people weighing their decisions. I think that there's something very very valid to people who would still get a PS5 because, number one, it is backwards compatible. Like, there was one guy who, shout out to him, he seems like he's having a great time, who said that he got a PS5 because he had the cash to burn and he was having a great time because it's backwards compatible with the PS4. So a lot of PS4 games, especially, ones from maybe the first half of the life cycle of that console, just tend to have price reductions now. They tend to go for cheaper. And then every now and again, he gets a brand fancy new PS5 game. And so he's living it up because I think he said he was like a Nintendo guy. He'd been a Nintendo guy for most of his life, and he decided to dip into PlayStation. And so he's like, oh shit, now I got all these games to play. Nice. And you know what? I mean, in that situation, if you personally think that the purpose of that segment was not necessarily to rag on the PS5 or to say that, oh, you should go buy a PC or anything like that. I mean, in effect, it sort of did rag on the PS5 because I think that's just how the evidence, stacks up. I don't know. It was more so just to take a look at the actual state of its library and what you can glean from it. Consoles have always had the advantage of convenience, right? It's just a box. You put the game in the box, and then it starts up. The game is made for that specific hardware spec. You don't have to worry about graphics drivers or upgrading components. excuse me, or conflicting software or anything like that. Why am I burping all of a sudden? That's always been the advantage. And the problem, I think an issue that Sony starts to run up against now is when you price something so high, it's like $800, and in certain regions even more expensive, right? By equivalent USD, that when you're weighing your options and you're like, okay, if I want to jump into this, do I buy a PS5, like from a clean slate? Do I buy a PS5 or just build a PC, like a gaming PC? And depending on how serious you are about it, the gaming PC could genuinely be a better option. It would be a little bit more expensive, but significantly with a significantly wider library and in terms of new stuff coming out. Mind you, when it comes to PCs, not everyone needs a PC. Right? That's the other thing, is a lot of people get by and they just have a laptop for their daily computing. We used to have family computers because not everyone needed one. Also, it was less integrated. Like, you can't go to high school today if you don't have a laptop of some sort. Sometimes you can't go to middle school without having some sort of device. It's extremely integrated into a lot of our daily lives and institutions and all that. But back in the days, it was like, I remember in my household growing up, there was one computer, and it was the family computer. I was mostly the one using it because, like, my mom didn't really have to go on it for anything. And that was what we did. That was all we needed. And now you can just package that into like a laptop, and you're like, well, do I want to go all in on building a PC or even getting a pre-built when I could just get a console and I don't have to deal with all the headache, right? That's a real reason to get a console over a PC. There's also, there's something that I was thinking about that just occurred to me that I've never seen anyone talk about it, but I think it's really real. So people talk about the diminishing returns effect of each console generation since like the PS3, right? Really, I think it started with that. Like the jump from PS3 to 4 was much less appreciable than 2 to 3, 1 to 2, so on, right? When people talk about diminishing returns, they mostly talk about graphics, but I think that there's something bigger. There's something like more important when you're talking about games and libraries and things like that, and dare I say art, that is a lot more relevant, and that's the fact that advancements in technology are only useful in the capacity that they can fulfill larger creative visions. Is that like too maybe that's too complicated. So what I'm trying to say is I'm pulling up an interview. It's from Shmuplations called it's a translated interview from Shmuplations. Wonderful archive of translated interviews with mostly Japanese game devs. It's called "What is Game Design? 3 Perspectives." This is an interview. I think I've referenced it before. But it's with Hideo Kojima, who I don't have to introduce, Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, and Koichi Nakamura, who is the... from Chunsa. Koichi Nakamura. I'm going to like smack my head when Dragon Quest! I was like, he is Dragon Quest, right? He has a long history, but he has a really interesting quote. He has a really interesting quote here. Let me scroll down to his, where he talks about the way that he looks at game design. And this is an interview from like the 90s. And he says, where is it? Oh, sorry, no, it is Koichi Nakamura. Pardon me for my awful skimming skills. This just occurred to me as I was talking. It says, another approach to game design is to take a new piece of hardware and ask yourself, what is it capable of? How could I use it? It may be that new design insights come to you as a result of exploring those possibilities. I doubt the person who invented titanium had any idea it would end up being used in everything from golf clubs to glasses. Similarly, consider the SRAM technology. PCs had long had the ability to save data between games, but the person who first saw that technology and realized, I could make a huge console RPG now, that's a person who is capable of game design. So I think that this outlook is really fascinating, and I see the almost like inverse of it today. So what he's talking about is, I don't know, pretty self-evident. I'll belabor the point, however, just for you. When there are certain games that were not possible to make on consoles until certain technological innovations had occurred, right? The fact that now, this system comes out, the Famicom, whatever, and the Famicom has was it Zelda? Zelda had the battery saves, right? That wasn't introduced in Zelda 2. That was Zelda 1. Something like that comes out, and you go, oh, now, hang on, wait. So when I load the game up, it doesn't just start from scratch. I can actually load data from a previous game, a previous instance. Pardon, my neighbor's kids are really loud. You might hear them in the background. What can I do with that? And you can now make something like Dragon Quest. So there are games that are not possible to make until technological advancements come about. I think one of the reasons, I wasn't alive, but I think one of the reasons that something like Mario 64 was so exciting is that you literally couldn't make that game before the N64, before a 64-bit console. You could make things kind of close to it. There was like 32-bit systems and all that. But I think in general, my point stands, right? Like you could maybe make slightly scrappier versions of these things. You can't make, you couldn't make Final Fantasy 7 on the N64. You had to make that on the PS1 because it had the discs. You had to put that thing on 3 discs to convey the scale and scope of that game, right? When they remade Resident Evil 3 for the N64, that is like a remake. That is like from the ground up, practically. It might be using some of the same code, but a lot of it is like crunched down, especially asset-wise, right? Resident Evil 3 on the PlayStation 1, you could take a certain perspective on it and look at those as being 2 different games. RE3 on the PS1 is like a different game to the one on the N64. You could not make the PS1 version on the N64. You needed the technological advancement. And I think when we talk about diminishing returns, it actually goes beyond just like, well, the graphics can't get that much prettier, right? It's if I'm a creative, right, and I have sufficient budget, genuinely, what are the limits left to break on my creativity? What are the limits left on what I can depict in a game, in a piece of software? I think one of the reasons a lot of people, sometimes people who grew up with gaming in the 80s or the 90s will say that it feels kind of like gaming has stagnated. And I disagree with that because I play a fuck ton of indie games and stuff like that. And there's always new, interesting stuff coming out. You just have to look for it. But in terms of like big budget games, I think there is some validity to the idea that those have stagnated because it's like, yeah, if you grew up and you went from Mega Man X to Super Mario 64 to like Final Fantasy X, your fucking mind got blown every 2 years. And that doesn't really happen anymore because it's like there are no new gates that are being unlocked by technology. And in some ways, I think that's actually a great thing. I think it's great that now there's just like a very free, open playground. And of course, there's limitations that are placed on devs by budget. And if you want to make something that looks a certain caliber, yes, you do need a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of people. But it's possible. Like, it's it's way more possible now than it was 20 years ago, right? So I think the lack of excitement, right? Because you look at, like, people look at games on the PS5 and they think, did this have to be on the PS5? Like, this could have been on the PS4. And in fact, a lot of those games are on the PS4. It was kind of funny to get comments on that clip that I made of people saying, what about Gran Turismo 7? What about Returnal? What about this? And I would be like, hey, you missed that. And I was like, no, those have ports. GT7 is on PS4. Returnal has been on Steam for like 2 years. It's like, there's no... You look at the game you're making, and I think genuinely from a business and also from an artistic point of view, you kind of look at it and you think, is there a reason this has to be on the PS5? Like just today or yesterday or something, people were talking about these Square Enix earnings reports where they said that FF7 Remake Part 2 didn't live up to their expectations, and it's like, well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a part 2 to a game that's like, it's not really easy to just jump into it, because also, from what I understand, I don't know enough about this, I haven't heard enough spoilers. From what I understand of FF7 Remake, those games like are like reinterpretations of the original plot. Like, I know some weird shit happens and it diverges heavily from the original at some point. But the other big factor is like, shit, I forgot that's been a PS5 exclusive. Like, you guys launched that on the PS5, a console that has, I mean, it's got like a decent install base for what it's worth. I think it's a little bit under what the PS4 was at this point in its life cycle. Ugh. I'm talking too fast, my mouth can't keep up. I'm thinking too fast, my mouth can't keep up. But like, did that have to be on the PS4? Sorry, on the PS5? Was there no way that it could have been on the 4? Right? And it's like, I don't know what you guys expected. I don't know exactly why it was so necessary. Maybe it is. Anyone who's played Rebirth, let me know. Was it imperative? Could you not see a single world where that game was able to fit on a PS4? Maybe the graphics looked marginally worse. Maybe it didn't. Maybe like the cloud bath scene didn't have ray tracing on the water in the bath when he was getting gangbanged. Sorry, that would have been remake. That would have been part 1. I'm actually a fraud. But yeah, it's like this weird state where, trying to think if like there's other examples. I suppose in film there was kind of maybe an example of this, just because, you know, we went from like film to color and digital and all that, and then visual effects had a very long technological evolution, you know, until the modern day where kind of everything has good effects, right? For the most, everything has at least passable like CGI these days. I'm sure there's examples that don't, but you know, I think it's because games, well, with film, it's like you can just kind of point a camera at someone. It's like, I mean, that's real life, you know? There isn't this sort of interesting do I want to call it a hurdle? This interesting factor that games have to account for, which is that they are all digital. They are all fake. There are FMV games, I suppose, but those are a little different. I don't want to get too lost in the weeds on like too much nuance and all that. But I genuinely feel like there's a problem. There's like a generational problem where it's like, yeah, you could sell a console based on this is the only place you're going to get to see this, right? It used to be a big selling point, for instance, that fighting games were really close to the arcade, right? Soul Calibur 1, I think, looked better on home consoles than it looked on the arcade. This is the only place you're going to get to see this. And now it's like, not really. The only reason that it's exclusive is just because of an exclusivity deal for the most part. There's no technological reason, And I find that a lot of the most interesting games coming out nowadays tend to be from small indie studios that are not pushing the limits of graphics and stuff like that. This is all funny because I'm going to talk about Space Marine 2 later in this podcast. But yeah, I don't know. A little bit of food for thought. Where else is there to go? Because yeah, on one hand, it's probably a little bit scary from a console manufacturer standpoint that it almost feels like the hardware is interchangeable at this point between systems. I guess the Switch is a little bit weak, but compared to the other two. But it's also kind of cool, It's like anyone could just kind of do anything now. So that's that. That I was chewing on that a little bit. I wanted to talk about a very weird, unfortunate news story that happened recently. Annapurna Games has basically just dissolved. Sorry, Annapurna Interactive. You might be familiar with them. They are, some people call them the A24 of video games. They are a subsidiary of Annapurna Entertainment, which is like a movie studio something or other. I don't care about movies. Annapurna Interactive is the publisher of a bunch of very cool, smaller scale, AA, single A, indie-ish titles. Is it indie if it has a publisher? Who knows? That's why we just got to use... That's why I want to start introducing single A. And... Oh, I forgot. Yeah, they also did Annapurna Animation. They're the ones who distributed Nimona. I totally forgot about that. Anyway, they are... You probably have heard of a bunch of games that they've put out. They just put out like these interesting little artsy-fartsy games that are very cool. They've been doing it every year. They're not always the original publisher, but they published What Remains of Edith Finch, Flower, Donut County, Gone Home, Outer Wilds, Journey, Sayonara Wild Hearts, Wat-Am, Kentucky Route Zero, The Unfinished Swan in 2020. Some of these are like re-releases. 12 Minutes, Artful Escape, Neon White, Stray, Cocoon, Thirsty Suitors, Lorelei and the Laser Eyes, Open Roads. They have upcoming is Wander Stop, which was a game that looked pretty cool. I think that's from it's from the guy who did Stanley Parable. Yes. So when I say they dissolved, I mean it just kind of randomly came out that the entire division of the company just quit. They were not fired. They were not laid off. They quit. They resigned. This is coming... So the original story was broken by Jason Schreier at Bloomberg. However, I am not reading from the Bloomberg article because it's paywalled. So I'm on Cartoon Brew. So according to them, reposting... Basically just regurgitating the Bloomberg article. Annapurna Interactive. So essentially this came about as a result of a contract dispute, or not a contract dispute, sorry, a dispute over trying to spin off Annapurna Interactive into its own company. I guess they were trying to go solo or something. I'm not sure exactly what it was. From I don't know the details. I don't think anyone in the public, it hasn't been publicly reported what the specific details of this little spat was. But the fact that they all resigned kind of suggests to me that they wanted to take Annapurna Interactive independent of the larger, like, I don't know what it would be, parent company, I suppose. The owner of it, the owner, Megan Ellison, who is the, Megan Ellison, brother, his name is Megan, brother to David Ellison, who owns Skydance Media, who is buying Paramount. Wait, no. Megan Ellison is a girl. It's because then it says, whoever wrote this article doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about. Was this written by AI? I don't know. They are both the siblings of the Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison. What does Oracle even do to be like the biggest company? I don't know what they do. Anyway, seems like Ellison, Megan Ellison, who is they call her the operator. I guess she was the president, or I don't know what her title was. She's the head honcho over there. They got into, she maybe just didn't want them to go off on their own. And surprisingly, they'll just quit, which is fascinating. I wonder if they're in the process. It suggests to me that like they're in the process of just making their own company. Kind of reminded me of what happened with Lab Zero Games and Skullgirls. If you didn't catch that, Skullgirls, the fighting game, was developed by a company called Lab Zero, and then the original lead designer and one of the original creators of Skullgirls, Mike Z, was apparently like a super creep, and a lot of people kind of hated working with him. So everyone from the company quit. They transferred the rights of Skullgirls to the publisher Autumn Games, and then the old people from Lab Zero made a new developer called Reverge, and have just been continuing development that way, and they just left him as it was like one of the craziest like ship of Theseus fucking, what would you even call that? It's not a hostile takeover. It's like a hostile, I don't know, hostile reformation? I've got no clue. Like, they fired him without firing him because, like, he owned something or something like that. Kind of reminds me of that sort of a situation. They're like, fine, we'll do it ourselves. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next year or so, they scrounge together some VC money or something like that to just start their own publisher. Hopefully that happens and most of these people can like get back to publishing cool games. It's a real I have no idea like what's going to happen with fucking Annapurna now. Because they've still got games coming out. There's like a Blade Runner game that they're apparently helping develop as well. They have like a bunch. They're publishing a Silent Hill Townfall horror. I don't know what that is. They have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's almost 10 games that have not been released yet, Actually, more if you can. Actually, no, 2025. There's like over a dozen games that they have not released yet. So I have no clue what's going on. This sounds like it really does smell of like a huge middle finger to Megan Ellison. Just like, fuck you, figure it out on your own. I have to imagine the fact that everyone quit, there has to have been something crazy going on, right? There has to have been some kind of horrible relationship that they had with the parent company that inspired all of them to agree to do that. Oh no, Kat has a migraine. That sucks. I just got a DM from her. Initially, I was bummed out because Annapurna does put out so much cool stuff as a publisher. But really thinking on it more, this will probably... I think it'll turn out okay. You know, the people who were part of that are still around. Seems like just sort of a mutiny situation, to be honest. But initially it was a little sad and concerning and quite shocking. It's very rare that an entire company quits. It was only 25 people, you know, this isn't like a 300-person team or anything like that. I also find it interesting that I don't know if they if they went on strike or anything before this, or I've got no clue. But definitely a unique situation that I'm curious to follow and see where it ends up. I want to talk about the Marvel vs. Capcom collection because it came out. I have been playing it, and more importantly, I've been making custom color palettes. So I have a fondness for making custom alternate colors for different fighting games. I made a bunch for Plus R a while ago. There is a very easy tool. It's called Pal Mod, as in palette mod, that is compatible with a bunch of games and lets you go to town on editing existing color palettes to make your own. There's a lot of cool custom ones that people have made, and specifically in the case of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which is sort of the spotlight game of this collection, it is deathly important because you might be surprised to learn this. I was surprised because I never really paid attention to it. The alternate colors in Marvel 2 kind of suck ass. They're largely terrible. A lot of them are just, every character has 6 different palettes, and most of them are just, they took the original and then just made the colors lighter or darker. There's very few interesting alts. There's a couple characters who have consistently good ones. Funny, like Jin. Jin has, like, I think all of his look pretty good, actually. A lot of the Street Fighter characters have good alts, which I imagine comes from the fact that they just took the original ones from those games. But there's a lot that are like, oh my god, look at Iceman's. They just make him, like, 3 of them are just, like, making him vaguely piss-colored. The other ones are, like, a really light, desaturated green, and just so many of them are really dog-ass looking. So many of the iconic palettes of Marvel 2 are actually mods. Like, it shocked me to learn that Mango Sentinel was a mod. Honestly, I think that was supposed to be the color scheme of the New York Knicks. Is it the Knicks or the Mets? Or do all the New York teams have the same color scheme? Now, the Mets are like orange and blue. What are the Knicks? They're also orange. Okay, so they all have the same colors, yeah. I'm pretty sure that's just what that was. Also, the teal... like the teal and red Magneto, also a mod. There's probably a couple others that I'm not thinking of, but yeah, a lot of them are straight up just... Marvel 2 was a heavily modded game back in the day, because a lot of the default things, like music and stuff, people just didn't vibe very much with. I love the Marvel 2 soundtrack, but that people would just replace that soundtrack with like I don't know, DMX or something. Limp Bizkit, because it was the 2000s. So I had a lot of fun going through and making just some like cool looking palettes, in my opinion. Also, as is tradition, I made a bunch of cellar color variants for every single character. I actually went through and did every character, which was a lot of fun. It's the magenta, cyan, white, and black scheme. And in my opinion, honestly, maybe not like the best to play with in terms of visibility, but just from a visual standpoint, I love looking at them and I love making them. They are really fun. And once you kind of figure out because it forces you to really pare down the details of the sprite. And once you figure out which details to remove and which ones to accentuate with the colors, honestly, I'm biased because I love the CGA colors. I think it looks really cool. So that was fun. And I've also been doing a little bit of playing the actual games. Shocker. So those games are... So, okay, I only really have a little bit of experience with Marvel 2. I've never played like a ton of it, but it's just kind of one of those games everyone sort of likes. I do like that game quite a bit. Messing around with different teams. What have I been playing? I've been playing like... I love Juggernaut. So I was playing like Juggernaut, Cyclops, Bison. With like Cyclops anti-air assists and Bison scissor kicks assists. Just like a really dumb, fun team, in my opinion. Marvel 2 is a really interesting game because there's like two different worlds that are kind of almost like formats. You know how in card games there'll be different formats? Like Magic has a bunch of different formats that are, here's the current sets that are in rotation that are allowed, and then they've got, here's every single card that you can play. In this format, you can play with every single card that's ever been released. And in this format, you can play, it's sort of like in between where it's not quite, what do they call it, modern or something? It's not quite every card, but it's like from a certain period to a certain period in time. And, or a certain period to like the present day. It's kind of like from the middle history to present. Because the super old cards are so crazy strong that they warp the meta. And all that. So they've got like these interesting different formats that people really like. And I think that's one thing that would be really cool in fighting games. And Marvel 2 is the one game where I've seen it done. The idea was eventually adopted into Marvel 3, but this community format rose up in recent years called Ratio, the Ratio format. And the idea, it actually technically comes from Capcom vs. SNK 1, where in that game, that was like a team game, but certain characters, it had this thing called the ratio system, where certain characters had a higher ratio, and depending on how high their you had like a maximum of 4 points to spend on a team, and some characters were worth 1 point, and some could be worth 4. Like a Shin Akuma is worth 4 points or something. So you can, if you're gonna run Shin Akuma, it's only him. That was eventually morphed into the free ratio system in CVS2, where you could choose. You could essentially buff characters up and assign them more points out of 4. But the ratio format is essentially, here's a tier list of characters, and depending on how good the character is, the more points they're worth. And you have a budget of 7 points to work with. So you make your team based off of, you can pick like the very top tiers are worth like 5 points, right? So you can only pick like 2 1-point characters, which are going to be like super low tiers. Or you can pick like a 2-point character, which is going to be a little above low tier. And then I think Roll is considered like a 0-point character or something like that. And she's like, she's basically a joke character. So It sort of forces people to come up with these really interesting team compositions where you can't just like run the generally accept. It's like when you watch Unlimited Marvel 2, teams tend to be like, it's like, okay, the people who are really serious about when they're running Magneto, Storm, Sentinel, Psylocke, Cable, Cyclops sometimes, all X-Men. X-Men are crazy in that game. They're running some combination of Captain Commando, Iron Man. You know, they're running some combination of like 10, 11 characters mayhaps. And it's cool. Like, those characters are cool to watch. But basically, people just got kind of tired of it. And when you go watch a ratio tournament, there's all sorts of weird, cool stuff, you know. Interesting team compositions and characters you normally wouldn't see. Pokemon also, I remember when I dipped my toe into competitive Pokemon, also has a version of this because the top tier Pokemon are just so over-centralizing that they get put into their own tier. And then there's a tier below that of like just sort of high tier Pokemon, and that encompasses high tiered Pokemon and below. And most people just play that tier. They don't even play the top tier, like ultra, what is it? Yeah, something like ultra tier or something like that. Uber tier, that's what it is. Everyone plays the one below that because the top tier is just like, they make the game less interesting or whatever. So it's a fun game to jump in, mess around with. I think the collection as a whole is great. I don't have very many complaints myself as someone who is mostly casual. There are a couple things that hurt. Number one, bug fixes to bugs that shouldn't have been fixed. The number one thing everyone's talking about is the Juggernaut glitch, which hurts me as someone who loves jugs. The Juggernaut glitch is very, very silly. It's essentially that Juggernaut has a move where he powers up and his next hit will deal like double damage or something like that. But it only lasts for that one hit. However, you can break this mechanic by just tagging him out and then tagging him back in, and he will just have the buff forever. It's really dumb and simple, but it's really fun, and you can basically kill any character off one hit with just like heavy punch into super. It's really funny. That, unfortunately, has been patched out, probably as a result of the fact that a lot of these games are being rewritten from the ground up. Sort of the reality of a lot of these modern ports, especially modern ports of old arcade games, is that those games were made for very specific hardware, those arcade boards, and sometimes it doesn't translate very well to modern operating systems. I remember, I mean, this isn't a super new thing. I have, you know, if you've done any kind of trying to play old games, especially old PC games, oh god, they can have problems running on new hardware. I remember when I fucking made the video on the War in Heaven, and I had to go in and literally, what is it? It's like Task Processor. It's like the super nerdy version of Task Manager. And I had to manually turn off certain cores on my CPU for that specific program. Because if you ran the game with more than 2 cores on a CPU that with more than 2 cores, it caused a memory leak that crashed the game after it spawned a single enemy. And like 2 minutes had passed or something like that. It was dumb. Old games oftentimes have to be many portions of them have to be rebuilt. So sometimes devs just don't know what's in or what causes something and what doesn't. So some stuff is just different from port to port. So the good thing is that most of the game-breaking glitches have been fixed. I think all of them have been fixed. Like things that would freeze the game and stuff like that. Those are generally the glitches that people don't even like. But yeah, the I don't know why the Juggernaut. That's all. It's like a weird standout thing. I don't know why that was necessary, or because that feels like something you could have hard coded in, you know. But besides that one little gripe, this is like very close to the original the original games as they released and how they function and how they feel in most senses, from what I've heard of people who played on the arcades, that this is a very faithful collection. It comes with a ton of like awesome artwork and stuff and music. That's great. That's kind of standard. That was in the first collection as well. All with rollback and online lobbies and ranked. The matchmaking has been there's been a lot of problems with it online. But if you have someone online that to play with, in person or just to set up a lobby together, these games are really, really fun. I'm looking forward to playing them with like Kat or something when I go over to her house. I have not touched a lot of the games in this collection before. Like, I hadn't really messed around with Children of the Atom, X-Men Children of the Atom. That is a funky game. It definitely comes from the point in time where Capcom was experimenting a lot with the format of what they wanted their games to be, right? Like, Street Fighter 2 was their basis, and then you get stuff like Darkstalkers and these games, and they really experimented a lot with, like, how could a super meter work? What kinds of inputs? Oh my god, the inputs in some of these games are just weird. Like Iron Man in Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter, one of them. The input for his smart bombs, which is he just like shoots some like grenades out of his shoulders somehow. The input is like light kick plus heavy punch. And I'm like, what? You couldn't have just made it like a quarter circle or something? Like, why is such a weird input? There's so many funky inputs in these games. It's kind of funny and quaint looking back. I am glad that they got standardized over time, as like there's maybe 4 or 5 inputs that you have to know, and then you can play like every fighting game ever from the last 20 years. But other than that, doing combos in these games is really funny, because despite the fact that in many ways they're very flashy, I think a lot of people there's an association between very flashy fighting games and combo heavy games. And what's really funny is that you play like Children of the Atom or Marvel versus Street Fighter or X-Men versus Street Fighter, and a lot of them, they're not like made for combos, if that makes sense. Like, the combos exist and there's plenty of infinites and crazy shit, but it feels a lot like, I don't know, I don't want to say exploit, but like a little more roundabout than you'd expect. Like not really intended to be there, more so just a natural consequence of the fact that like how frame data works, like, yeah, which to be fair is how combos kind of originated essentially in Street Fighter 2, where it was like, oh, okay, well, this attack stuns the opponent for this many frames, and this other attack comes out in this many frames, so I have enough time to link them together, sort of thing. The combos are so fun. It's like, there's so many combos in like X-Men versus Street Fighter that I was watching that are just like, you do a hit on the ground and then you do like a jump in heavy, and then you just loop those two over and over again, and you have enough time to always land the jump in, because you land so fast and then recover so fast after landing, and then you can do it's so goofy looking from a modern standpoint. Every single combo is like, gee, how did you figure this out? Like, what the fuck? Very surprising to go back and play something like Children of the Atom and realize that they're very conservative with allowing like chain combos. Like, some characters you can do like medium to like light to heavy punch, and some characters you can't, and some characters you can mash jab with, and some characters you can't. And that's like a specific, it's like a combo, that's like an actual distinct, they'll let you do that and chain them together. And it's interesting. Another thing that I've come to appreciate from playing them and also just doing like all the sprite editing is holy shit. Capcom sprite artists in the 90s were on another level. Everyone always talks about the SNK sprites, and for good reason. Those are incredible. And they also like put out way more games and stuck to the sprite art for longer than Capcom did. But oh my god, dude. Fucking Cyclops might have the most gorgeous sprite I've ever seen. In a fighting game. It is unreal. Just like his physicality, the smoothness of his animations, like he's fucking incredible to watch. From like a rendering and animation standpoint, unbelievable. I think it's really funny that he's like the Ryu of the game, but he's also got like all this weird, he's got these weird moves, again, like the experimental stuff that they were messing around with. He's got like a move where he like, you can only do it while dashing. He has two different specials. And if you're dashing and you like hit like a punch button a bunch, like light punch into medium punch and then hit punch over and over again, specifically that sequence while dashing, you'll get this unique chain combo that is like, I don't know why you'd use it. There's also one for kicks. I was like, what? I was having trouble even getting it to start because for some reason the game like did not want to accept that I was dashing while hitting the button or something. Very funky, funky ass game. You look at like Magneto. Oh my god, Sentinel has all of these different components. What a great just robot, you know? All these different components that are just like moving independently of each other, and it looks like he looks so rigged up, you know, like all these different parts of him, like the arms and the legs and the head and the chest are all kind of bouncing individually, and there's like little like steam bursts coming out intermittently. Like such a great looking sprite. The artwork is like incredible. I will say, I hate the filters. I hate the filters, like the default ones in this collection. The one that's, what the fuck? The one that's on by default, I think looks really bad. It looks like I'm looking at the game through a microwave. Like a microwave window where it's this weird, like, it looks like you have like a like black film over it that a bunch of tiny little circles are cut into. I think it looks bad. I've been using because I think like the just pixel art looks a little bit too crunchy for me. So I've been using the lightest version of the filter that they have. And that's been doing me pretty well. But overall, yeah, it's a really cool collection. It's like a little bit pricey at like, what is it, $40 or $50, something like that. It's like a little pricey. I think on sale it would be a total steal for like $30 or something like that. But it's a good collection, especially if you like any of these games. It's also really cool to just have them easily purchasable in a modern format. There's been like a kind of dumb discussion about like, you can just play them on Fightcade though. And it's like, yeah, but this is nice. Number one, it's nice to have a collection like this because, it's just, it's nice to have like a publisher who kind of feels like they sort of care about their legacy. I was thinking about how fucking stupid EA is and the fact that they've never put out like an EA Classics collection. It would be so easy, dude. It would be so, oh my god. I would check that out 100%. I think it's also nice to like, okay, yes, you can just play all these games on Fightcade, but like, it's a pain in the ass. Like, it's, for most people, it's a pain in the ass. Like, for me, it's not that crazy because I'm willing to like look up. Okay, if I want to play X-Men versus Street Fighter on Fightcade, what do? I have to download Fightcade, which is its own application. I have to make an account on it. I have to then join. The whole system of joining lobbies is a little unorthodox, I think, from what most people are used to. And then I think the biggest hurdle is just finding the actual ROMs for the games and setting up the directories and all that. And then someone's like, oh, but hang on, this guy has a GitHub program that automatically downloads the ROMs for a game anytime you join a lobby for that game, which does it automatically. Then people are like, oh, will this give me a virus? I don't know. And it's like, no, it won't give you a virus. It's fine. I've genuinely seen people be like, is Fightcade, can I get a virus through it? Like, no. I don't want to sound mean or anything, but that's just like how a lot of people, like, they don't know, you know, they're not used to going through these like weird gray market solutions to playing games and stuff. So it's nice to have it. It's nice to have a collection where you get lots of nice art and music, and all the games are easily playable. You can play multiple different versions of them. It's really easy to hook up with people online. When I say multiple versions, I mean it comes with, you can swap freely between the Japanese and international versions, and there's actually regional differences, like the Japanese version of Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter, yes, that's the full title, has an exclusive character named Norimaru, who was a Japanese physical comedian from like the 80s and 90s, I think, he played this character who for some reason is just in Marvel vs. Capcom. I don't know why. I don't know. I guess they were just fans of him. He was not included in the international release because I don't think anyone outside of Japan knew who the hell he was. So he is now playable, which I think is actually a really cool detail that they got cleared with his. He's still alive. I imagine because it was actually like kind of a big deal amongst fighting game peoples when there was a trailer that showed him off, because there was sort of a concern that like, oh, is that going to be a licensing problem to include him? Because it's such a weird, you know, it's such a, like, I guess he owns the rights to that character and his likeness and all that. So seeing that they actually got it worked out was nice. I imagine it was in negotiations by the time that they filled it out. By the time that they revealed the collection, at the very least, it's just that, you know, Japanese paperwork takes a long time from what I've heard. But yeah, I've been having a really good time with the MvC Collection. Speaking of gorgeous sprite work, I finally got the chance to play a game that I have had my eye on for like forever, it feels like, and just finally just pulled the trigger and bought and played on Steam. It's called Touhou Luna Nights. It is a Touhou spin-off game, fan game thing. Touhou has a very funny relationship with fan games, because as long as you... Basically, the policy that Zun laid out, the creator of Touhou, is that, like, well, as long as you say it's unofficial or that you make it clear that it's a fan game, then not a problem. And that's why there is so much Touhou fan stuff. Did it just go on sale 2 days after I bought it for full price? Are you fucking kidding me? God damn it. I feel so... That's like I'm never gonna buy a game full price again now. Well, ignoring that, Touhou Luna Nights is a really cool game. It came out in 2019. It is... I hate saying this word. I hate saying it. I'm going to say it. But I don't want to. It is a Touhou Metroidvania. I had like a whole podcast about why I hate the term Metroidvania, but that's like what it is. It is a Symphony of the Night style game set in the Touhou universe. If you don't know anything about Touhou, you really don't need to. It is a series of I realized that I never even introduced what that is. Touhou is a series of indie bullet hell shoot 'em ups that are all created by this guy named Zun, Z-U-N, and they're all just kind of about girls in big frumpy outfits and hats shooting fairies. You would think that because it has like 1 billion characters and stuff and 1,000 different fan works, it would have some like super complex lore. And the reality is that like the plot of every game is the simplest thing ever. And it's really just that people like the characters. I like Touhou a lot. I've played quite a few Touhou games in the past, and Luna Nights uses the cast of Touhou 6. So every game in the series kind of like, it's like a whole new slew. Typically, like the main playable characters are always the same. There's always there's always Reimu and Marisa, and then smatterings of other playable characters who jump in depending on this game or that game. But all the bosses and stuff are always unique, and there's always like 12 new characters in each game because everyone needs a sub-boss and everything like that. This is specifically the characters from Touhou 6, which is I would say probably the most popular one. It's the one that actually was the first bullet hell in the series. It's also the first one that I played, and it features its main character is Sakuya Izuyoi, who happens to be one of my top 2 favorite Touhous, along with Alice Murgatroyd. Sakuya is a maid who can stop time. She is like one half of a JoJo reference because she's the maid to a vampire named Remelia. Remelia does not stop time, but Sakuya does, and she of course like throws knives. That's like her main weapon. So she like is the maid of this castle that Remelia lives in, and she stops time and so that she can clean, because it's like infinite, and so the only way she can clean it is she stops time. Very funny. Anyway, this is a very, I would say, pretty traditional Metroidvania that plays pretty well, and I had a really good time with it. It's not terribly long. It took me about 10 or 11 hours. It has some amazing sprite work. Really, really beautiful game to look at. Really like clean, simplified, sort of like chibi appealing graphics, and really nice music as well. A lot of Touhou remixes, of course, because I feel like Touhou music remixes are an integral part of the brand at this point. As well as certain very clear homages. It'll be like a Touhou song, and then you'll hear a song from like Symphony of the Night come in, and you're like, oh, okay. It's very Symphony of the Night like in many, many ways. Like Sakuya literally has Alucard's like run animation, and the little back step that he does, she has that exact, like when you're going one direction and then you tap to the other direction, and Alucard kind of like whooshes backwards and then turns around. She does that exact same thing. It's pretty fun. The main mechanic is so it's this basic template of the sort of Metroid style structure, where I call it the leapfrog structure, where you're exploring, you come to a door you can't open, and then so you have to go to another door, and you do a whole section there, and then you find a key, and the key leads back to the door. You leapfrog back, you leapfrog over, and then you leapfrog back. That's just what makes sense in my head, so that's what I call it, which I find fun. I get very sucked into these games just because I haven't played too many of them, but I get very sucked into them just because that structure is very engrossing to me. Because it's this very consistent... There's not a lot of natural stopping points, because whenever you get something or finish something, there's always... You usually have like a, oh, now I can go here. Now I can go here. There's never a point where, okay, now I'm going to see new stuff. Now I'm going to go to a brand new part of the game that I haven't seen before. It's always... I guess, hang on, I can phrase that better. You know when you're playing like a level-based game and you finish the level and you're like, all right, that's a stopping point. I feel like a lot of Metroid games don't have that because the maps are designed to be so interconnected. So you always kind of know what you're going to do next for the most part, or you can kind of figure it out. The main mechanic that's cool about this game is the time manipulation stuff. So you can slow time and then also completely stop it. You have a mana bar, an MP gauge, and that determines how many knives you can throw. As you attack, every attack uses up MP. It regenerates slowly over time. And then you can also spend MP on a bunch of different other abilities, like, very just special tools and weapons that you get. Your time slowing move. And then you have a separate gauge, it's called the time gauge, which is for stopping it entirely. And the time gauge leads to some pretty interesting... There's some cool puzzle stuff in this game. So the main... There's a bunch of things that get affected when time stops. For instance, like an early one that you'll run into is water. Water will no longer flow. So you'll reach this place where... You'll reach a room where there is a body of water. And on the other side of the body of water is a ledge that is too high up for you to jump out of the water and reach. However, if you stop time, you can run across the water's surface, and then that'll be high enough for you to actually jump up to that ledge on the other end. So stuff like that. Then you start running into things like, oh, but there's also a waterfall in the middle, and so you need to move a platform. There's a moving platform, and you have to stop time when the platform is halfway across the water. Oh yeah, because they started introducing stuff where it's okay, certain things will stuff with a purple outline continues to move. It's not affected by stop time. Things with a green outline only start moving in the stop time. So it's here's a green platform, and you have to stop time, and it carries you across, except there's a waterfall in the middle, and that's essentially a wall. So you have to let the platform pass partially through the waterfall, unfreeze time, walk through the waterfall to the other side, and then freeze time again. It plays into the combat in a fun way, because when you are in the frozen time, all of your attacks consume the time gauge, which ticks down continuously as it's frozen. So you can do some JoJo shit where you freeze time and then throw a bunch of knives and unfreeze time, and they all shoot into the enemy and stuff. It's very fun. There's also a grazing mechanic, which I thought was cute. If you don't know, grazing is a mechanic that appears in, I believe, every single Touhou game, at least the bullet hells, which is essentially based on the idea that when you watch a bullet hell and you're like, how do they dodge all that? One of the reasons is that the actual hitbox of the character is actually much, much smaller than the sprite. So, it'll, in a Touhou game, it'll just be a little part of the character's midsection will be the actual hitbox. So grazing is a mechanic where the bullet will pass through the sprite without hitting you, of course. And in the Touhou games, grazing always does it always does something different. It's usually at least some kind of score multiplier. Sometimes there's mechanics tied into it, like, there's one, I think Touhou 8 or 9 or one of them. It has like a time advancing mechanic where every stage you play advances the game's clock by like an hour, and you have to beat the game within a certain time limit on the in-game clock and stuff. But if you get enough graze points, it'll only advance by 30 minutes and stuff like. So it's kind of like it's a part of the game that shows up a lot, and it's sort of like it's a very bullet hell like challenge thing, because when you want to take your gameplay to the next level and get really high scores, you start going for higher graze points, because it's usually a multiplier. So a lot of Touhou games in different genres tend to adapt the grazing mechanic with different ways. Like the Touhou fighting game, one of the Touhou fighting games, because there's several, Hiso Tensoku has a pretty cool integration of it. I don't want to get like too bogged down in talking about it, but in this game, it's very similar, where the Sakuya's actual hitbox is quite a bit smaller than you would expect based on the sprite. And if you touch a projectile or an enemy, it doesn't have to be a projectile, without getting hit by it, if you graze it, it gives you back health, mana, and your time gauge. But if the time stop is in effect, it'll only return a little bit of time gauge and MP and not health. So there's kind of this cool sort of twist to the game, where a lot of attacks are hard to dodge, but you essentially gain health back. There's like a risk-reward thing. You can gain a bunch of resources back by getting closer to the danger, and also most of the bosses have attacks that are kind of designed to essentially be like refreshes on your resources and stuff like that. Because you'll burn through a lot of MP, like just spamming knives and stuff like that. There is a super integral special weapon you get, which is just throw 1,000,000 knives, and it like auto targets. And that's and while you're throwing them, you'll just auto graze through everything. That's really important. It does technically make the game like a lot easier, but you need it. You do need it. The game is very hard to complete without, if you're ever going to use it. So that's why you should explore. One thing that I've never quite cared much for in these games is the RPG elements. I usually find them to be a little bit superfluous. I understand the purpose of them is like to give you a sense of progression over the course of the game, but I feel like it's kind of unnecessary, because the way that these games are designed, the exploration to me is the sense of progression and the items that you get. And I feel like attaching like you leveled up number to it is kind of unnecessary. And if it's done poorly, I can see it being kind of a burden. Like, I really do not want to friggin' grind in one of these games because I'm under-leveled for a boss. So I am begrudgingly okay with it if it's balanced in such a way where I don't really have to grind. Thankfully, Luna Nights was. I think there was like 2 points where I grinded, but honestly, in retrospect, it might have just been, I don't think the getting like 1 or 2 extra levels was that useful. It was more so that I was just bad at, I didn't really have a good strategy for those boss fights. So I don't mind it too much in this instance, although I do think that you could take it out. There's a sort of weird shop system where when you kill enemies, you get these gems, and you would think that the gems are the currency, but no. You go to Nitori, who's like a little inventor Kappa girl from the Touhou series, and you have to sell her the gems to get gold, and then use the gold to buy items. It's very weird. And again, kind of superfluous. I don't know why she couldn't just accept the gems. Because there's like, all the gems are worth, there's a bunch of different gems and they're all worth different amounts of gold when you sell them back to her. I don't know why they couldn't have just been like automatically done the conversion. It's just like a weird kind of unnecessary extra step to buying stuff that, oh, I have to also sell my gems. And what's super weird is that they let you sell the gems individually, like each different type of gem individually, but they also have an option to just sell all of them at once, and I don't know why you would ever not do that. I don't get it. Doesn't really hurt the game. Just weird. Just a weird observation. But in general, Luna Nights is very fun. Again, like once you get to a certain, it's funny because like I felt like the power that I was getting didn't really have that much to do with my level. I'm sure it did to some extent, but it was more just like, oh cool, I feel like I have a bunch of useful tools because all the special items that you get and the upgrades to like how long you can stop time and how much MP you have. You get like certain special abilities like a dash and stuff like that are really cool. And they make you feel more powerful just by giving you new options and more powerful ways to fight enemies. So that feels good. Again, just like certain superfluous systems around it that feel like they maybe could have been taken out. But I enjoyed it. I had a good time with Luna Nights. I would recommend it. It's on sale right now for like $11. So, seems like a good deal. What else have they made? They've made a couple games since then. Record of Lodos War. Huh. Okay. I guess they made another Metroidvania in this style. That's cool. Also, again, to reiterate, gorgeous pixel art. Like, incredible looking game. And they made like a shmup. That's cool. Called Drainus. Drainus my anus. Ooh. Maybe don't. Maybe don't do that one. Anyway, yeah, Luna Nights, check it out. And finally, I have now finished Space Marine 2. I finished the main campaign. I've done a little bit of the co-op stuff. I have not jumped into the PvP yet for some reasons I'll explain. So I've been looking forward to Space Marine 2 for quite a while. I like the original game a lot. And I was excited for the unique to get more of the sort of things that were unique to that game. I love walking around these big, spectacular Warhammer 40k environments. The gameplay was very simple in the original, but very satisfying and didn't overstay its welcome. I would describe the original as like a perfectly paced game. It ramps up just as much as it needs to, and then it ends just when it has to. If that original game went on for an hour or even like 30 more minutes, I think it would have gotten a lot less enjoyable. Like it would have just worn out its welcome. But it ends at like the exact 8-hour mark. Perfect. So I was curious from like an artistic standpoint to see how Space Marine 2 would iterate on a game that was so 7th gen in its design. And I have to say that, okay, you remember when I was talking about Quake 4 and I said, man, you can really tell when Half-Life came out. I'm playing Space Marine 2 and I'm like, man, you can really tell when Doom Eternal came out. Because it's not like a one-to-one ripoff or anything like that. But there's just these certain ideas introduced in SM2. Not Spider-Man 2, Space Marine 2. Spuma 2. Where it's like the dodging and the parrying and the counters and the glory kills it's practically like giving you the way that it gives you a reward on kill. is so like I can feel it. I can feel the influence. Although this game has a lot of other cool things going on. The combat is definitely more fleshed out from the original. I would say that it's about as deep as I needed it to be for the length that the game is. It wasn't terribly long. How many hours do I have in it? Something like 15 hours. 15 hours, and actually most of that I would say is the campaign, and one or two of those are probably the co-op missions. I guess I'll get my negatives out of the way first, because I have more positives than negatives. So negatives. This game's not very well optimized for certain setups. I'm playing this on PC, on Steam, and holy fuck the load times. Oh my god. They addressed this in a patch and it like made it a little better, I think. But wow. Okay, so I am playing this off of an HDD. And for most games, like a lot of people have a setup similar to mine on PC, where I have all of my like operating system and my commonly used programs and my browser and stuff like that. And personal files, that's all on an SSD for like quick access. And then I put like games and, archives of all of the videos that I've made. All of that is on a hard disk drive that's like 10 terabytes big. So it's like infinite storage practically for my purposes. For most games, so the trade-off between an SSD and an HDD is that a hard disk drive is much slower to read and write, that is to download and load things, but the cost to storage ratio is insane. It is orders of magnitude larger than an SSD in most cases. So I put all my games on there, and for most of them, basically practically all of them, the boot time is a little bit longer, but the in-game load times are normal, I would say. Like, kind of what I would expect. I'm fine with having 10 or 15 seconds longer of a boot time. It's fine, I'll survive. Space Marine 2, I was waiting almost 10 minutes. Almost 10 minutes from clicking play on Steam to getting into gameplay, like actual gameplay in the mission, through like 3 different loading screens, like one on the boot screen, one on the initial like loading my save, and then one to get into the mission. It was so goddamn long, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that you connect to like a server, which I think could probably be heavily optimized. The servers are very slow. Maybe it'll get better once the game's been out for a little longer and like requests to the server have cooled down. But man, it is taking fucking forever. It was very hard to consistently get into co-op games. I'd load in and it would just be in a loading screen for 5 minutes. And I was like, I don't think this is going anywhere. Connectivity issues are a problem for me at the moment, and it's probably the biggest thing that is discouraging me from continuing to play it, just because, like, I don't want to wait 10 fucking minutes for the game to load up. So, that's easily my biggest gripe, which is probably an okay gripe to have. Now on to the positives. Number 1, this game's environmental artists went insane. They went crazy. And the sound effect team, holy cannoli, dude. The environments are absolutely gorgeous. We were just talking earlier about the kind of wall that we've hit in terms of graphical improvements. Space Marine 2 is a game that I'm like, damn, this is the first game that I've had like frame drops on, because there's so much shit and it looks too good. And I'm running it on like ultra. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I can accept that. I'm flying too close to the sun. oh my god, just like the lighting, the architecture, the attention to detail. Regularly, like this is an extremely linear game, but even for segments where technically you're kind of just walking down a hallway, they will construct these lavish environments that extend well beyond the playable area just to fill out the world. And it really goes a long way to making the game feel less linear, right? Like it feels like you are in a larger world that is not just like a roller coaster ride that it's just a track you're going on, right? This is like a lot of polished stuff, a lot of just detail. There's also the fact that like frequently the fact that these environments are so big allows them to leverage a really cool technical thing about the game, which is that Space Marine 2 focuses whatever engine or technology they used for their World War Z game, which featured these big swarms of zombies, and all of them were actual game entities that you could interact with. They weren't just for show. Like, even the ones off in the distance, right? This makes use of that, but for Tyranids, which is a pretty good, in my opinion, a pretty good usage of the technology. Tyranids they're the classic swarming army. They're the devouring swarm of the 40k setting. These fleshy bug monsters that just regenerate and reproduce, and they're all part of a hive mind, and they all swarm in one direction. And there are some truly awe-inspiring visuals in this game. I think in some cases, leaning heavily on spectacle can feel a little cheap, but when it comes to Warhammer, to me, the vastness is part of the appeal. Just the sheer size of everything is it, and what a strong aesthetic it has is a big part of the appeal of putting me into that world. And I think this game really accomplishes that, not just with the huge environments, but also with like, you're standing on this ledge, you're standing on a walkway, and the walkway is a small playable environment, but you can look to the right and there will just be a mass, just a horde of Tyranids just stampeding in the distance, and you can actually take out your gun and shoot them, and they are real. They will die, and you will see the particle effect of the blood shooting out. There will be explosive barrels that you can shoot in the distance, and a bunch of them will just and fly away. And it's a little bit of presentation, and that makes the world feel so much bigger, and less confined. It's really cool. The feeling of being a Space Marine is heavy. I think Space Marine should feel powerful and heavy, but also like decently fast. That's the thing about Space Marines in lore, is that they aren't just these towering, hulking, giant guys. They're also like really fast. They're kind of like freight trains, or like big ass trucks. They're like semi trucks, where they can build up a lot of speed, and that's kind of part of what's dangerous about them. So the move. So I do wish this game had an FOV slider. Apparently the FOV slider, there was actually a statement like today about why implementing one would be tricky, is because this game has like a mechanic, I guess. It's got a feature where at certain points a little prompt will come up that'll say attention, and you'll hit the button, and it'll kind of naturally move the camera over to a point of interest for you to make note of. Kind of like a sort of compromise between, we don't want to railroad you too hard in forcing you to look over here, but we also don't want you to like miss something big that's happening. And apparently that's hard to make play nicely with an FOV slider. I did feel like the screen was a little bit cramped. It feels like it was maybe designed to play more on consoles, which tend to have tighter FOVs than PCs, where you're much closer to the screen. Not like a terribly huge complaint, but it did feel a little bit cramped. But within that, Titus as a character, as a playable character, like stomps, and then when you go into a run, you run pretty fast, and it feels heavy, and there's screen shake, and you can do a running melee, and you'll like shoulder charge or something like that, depending on what weapon you have out. You can dodge out of the way, and the dodge is fast, and it's also invulnerable, like a Dark Souls roll. The combat has a really nice flow to it. It's not a... Would I say it's easy? I don't know. It's easy in the sense that if you're playing on the normal difficulty, you can probably get by without too much of an issue. I started the game off on Veteran, and I was getting my fucking ass kicked on just the tutorial, like, intro level. I was getting ripped apart. I died like 10 times, and I was like, I think I have to knock the difficulty down. Thankfully, you can between missions. And once I played on normal, it was still a good challenge. I almost wish there was like a middle point. I think I was talking about that on the last podcast. I wish there was a little bit of a mid-ground between the current like normal mode and the veteran, as they call it. Because they said veteran is the intended experience. One cool thing about the combat is that I was like at the end of the game, and I still felt like I could have played fights way better. Like to the point where I'm like, damn, I kind of want to replay it just because I want to get better at the combat. I was never perfect at it. It's a pretty simple combat system, all things considered, right? You got shooting, you have melee, but there's like some nice detail and complexity added in small dosages. So you got melee, you got your shooting, a bunch of different weapons. You can only carry 2 guns at a time. You have a primary and a secondary. And the selection of weapons, you're constantly getting options for new ones. You'll kind of figure out which ones you like more and which ones you like less. The melee weapons are very cool because they all have different combos and movesets. I think there's like 4 or 5 of them. I really like the power sword. I like that one a lot. That's like a balanced off single target and multi-target one. It has some cool stuff where... So generally the combos are executed by like... You do like a click, on the melee button, and then you can click a bunch of times to do a melee sequence, and then you can hold the button to do a certain finisher. So you can do like 3 light attacks and then hold to do a heavy attack that's like a unique finisher that's different from if you did like 2 light attacks or something like that. So they've all got these kind of subtly different movesets. They excel at different either single or multi-targets. What I liked about the power sword was that it didn't have like a standard heavy attack. The heavy attack is that it actually just switches modes. And in one of them, the single target mode, it does like a lot of like really aggressive strikes. And then the multi-target mode has these like bigger sweeps that don't like stagger individual enemies for very long, but it like lets out this kind of wave of energy to hit a bunch of enemies. And then you can like do an attack, and then Titus will go into a stance. If you do like a light attack and then don't press anything, not even movement, Titus will like hold his pose and go into a stance where the blade like flashes, and then you can do another melee attack, and it's like a unique finisher where he like does this like charging swipe and then leaps and then crashes the sword into the ground. It's really cool. The defensive options add a lot of... That's kind of, I'd say, the other half of your repertoire. And those are pretty much universal. They're cool. I like them. It's there's only like 3, I suppose. So there's parry. So there's 4. So there's blocking. Blocking is like a standard. Against certain enemies, you'll be able to get some kind of like they'll attack you, you'll block, and you'll negate the damage. Certain attacks are unblockable. They have to be rolled. So unblockable and unparryable. And they have to be rolled out of the way. The parryable attacks will have this like blue-green glow like indicator as the enemy like charges up their attack. And then if you press it within a certain, there's like perfect parry windows. And the closer, like the better your timing is. I don't know if it's like near the, I think it's if you get a really fast reaction rather than a late one, you will get a, you'll get a better like counter animation. So instead of like, the late parry, you'll just like swing your weapon and cut them in half before the Tyranid, like it does like a leaping attack. But for the perfect parry, like the good one, you'll grab it and then throw it down, and then it'll like stun nearby enemies. So reaction and timing are heavily rewarded. And that was like one of the main skills I felt like I needed to work on as I went through the game, was like, man, I just need to react to this shit faster. There's a sound cue, there's a visual cue, and I'm not reacting fast enough. And then there are so there's kind of like large and small enemies. For the large enemies, once you like block and parry one of their attacks, and sometimes if you roll like 2 attacks in a row or something, you'll get a little like target indicator on them. And then if you just click, you'll do an automatic, you'll pull out your secondary, like your pistol, and just shoot them. It actually doesn't use actually does not use any ammo, which I found. You'll shoot them, which will immediately stagger them. Enemies that are sufficiently weakened will be staggered, and then you can go up and do an execution, which is like a glory kill from the Dooms. And executions immediately refill some amount of your armor. This game's health system is, I like it. It's a little bit high pressure. It's difficult so you've got health, and health can be regenerated through either, it's got like kind of a Bloodborne thing going on where there's like a health bar. Once you take damage, you've got like some white health, and then you can deal damage back to the opponent to gain some of that white health back, although it deteriorates very fast. And then the only other way to regain it is like a med pack, and you can only carry 2 of those at a time, and you have to find them in the world. And then you got armor. Armor is, you've only got like 3 hits of armor, and they are hits. Like, you get struck, especially by a melee, like a whole chunk of your armor is gone. Like 1 hit is gone. Certain like smaller enemy attacks will just chip away at your armor. But a lot of them will just straight up take them. Like Mario. And then you can regain it by doing executions. And then it'll regen after a period of not doing a lot. So the combat can get very hectic. And very active. And staying on top of, there's like a whole lock-on function where you can lock onto the larger targets. Staying on top of enemies and what they're doing and when you can parry an attack and stuff, because those animations are like invincible. When you're parrying, when you're doing an execution, when you're rolling, and mixing those in to avoid like getting hit and staying free of damage and all that. Maximizing your time invulnerable. Because you will just be surrounded by a swarm of Tyranids, and you just have to chain sword through them. And it's not always like, you'll take damage, you're going to take hits. They're not exactly a pushover. There's some very fun one-on-one fights with like larger Tyranids. That's really cool. I will say, I guess, okay, so plot-wise, this is spoilers, I guess. I mean, it was in all the marketing promotion. The Tyranids are not the main villain of the game, which is like a bit of a bummer. because Tyranids are kind of like orcs. Funny enough, orcs are in the first game too. And the same thing happens to them. In a lot of Space Marine stories, stuff like Tyranids and orcs are used as like the initial threat that draws the main characters to the conflict. And then, it was actually chaos. It was chaos. There's an achievement called like Chaos All Along. So I was a little bit bummed that it's like, okay, it's just Chaos Marines again, like in the first game. However, that being said, I do like the fact, I think the way they did it was really cool. I like the fact that it's Thousand Suns. Typically in a lot of like external media, I say external media, like in a lot of 40k media, whenever they're like Chaos Marines, they're like, Black Legion, I guess. And to be honest, I think the Black Legion is the least interesting faction of the Chaos Space Marines. There are much more interesting parts of their loose association, you know? This one uses Thousand Suns, and that's really neat. Thousand Suns are essentially aligned with the chaos god Tzeentch, who's the god of like change and magic. So they're sort of like the sorcerer magic-y guys of the Space Marines, or that's kind of their specialty. They are also cursed to essentially be made of dust. So their bodies aren't really corporeal. They're just suits of armor that are like possessed by this magical dust. And the armor is like all that's left for most of them. For a lot of them. The way that they're depicted here is awesome. Like, it is really cool. Like, you'll do... It did get a pop from me when the first time you fight the Rubric Marines, as they're called. That's what the Thousand Suns guys are called. And you do like an execution on one of them, and it's like you're ripping the helmet off, and a bunch of just magic sand just blows out, like just streaming. And then all the armor pieces fall apart. It's like the guy's soul is released. It's great. It's really cool. They also provide a nice kind of up to the challenge because they're sort of like you, but evil. So they throw grenades. They have a bunch of different weapons. They can move around, and they have melee and stuff like that. So it's like a nice little scaling to the difficulty of the game that they bring. Plot-wise, it's fine. It's a pretty standard Space Marine story. It's not like the greatest thing that's ever been put out in 40k, but it's a fun like Space Marine action thing. I liked the relationships between the three main characters, Titus, Chiron, and Gadriel, who they're new to this game, and they have like certain suspicions about Titus being like not super trustworthy. I found some people saying like, it's so boring and repetitive, but honestly, most of the game's plot was like mostly it's a very plot driven story, and then a couple character moments interspersed throughout. It seemed like it was paced pretty well to me, and it didn't overdo it. It developed the relationships as much as I felt that they had to be. There was no explanation as to like why Titus, probably the biggest missed opportunity is there's no explanation as to why Titus is just sort of like not killed by the warp stuff from the first game, which was a big point of contention. It's kind of like why a big part of the character conflict in this game exists. Unfortunately, they don't expand on that at all. But, I don't know. I don't care too much. The rest of the game is very good. I would say it's generally, it feels nice in a kind of old way. It's an extremely focused game. Probably, it's very appropriate coming from Focus Entertainment. There is very little bloat in this game. There's no crafting system. There's no like side systems of that sort. Whenever I think of like dumb unnecessary stuff, my go-to is crafting systems, because when I was growing up, I remember when Minecraft got huge, and I saw like Dead Space 3 for the first time, and it was like with the new crafting system. And the first time I saw that shit, I was like, oh, this is here because of Minecraft, and it's probably like some bullshit that doesn't matter. And then every game for the next 10 years had a stupid crafting system in it, because Minecraft had it, even though those games did not like do it nearly as well or intertwine it into the gameplay as well as Minecraft does. But whatever. There's like really nothing of that sort in Space Marine 2. It is entirely about combat, and it does pretty good combat in very pretty environments with nice music and nice graphics and good spectacle and enough variety in what you're doing, and a generally pretty intriguing plot, at least in my opinion. And then you've got like some nice side modes. You've got the co-op missions that you do together. Essentially what happens is that the scale of the conflict in the story is so great that just Titus and his squad are not enough to like handle everything. So at various points, Titus will be like, okay, we need someone else to go do this thing. And that's where the co-op missions come in. They're called operations. And they are essentially that. Here is a storyline for these other 3 characters, and this is like the side stuff that they're doing while the main group is doing the stuff in the main campaign. This is also where the customization comes in, at least outside of the PvP. The customization in this game is really cool. It's kind of old school in the idea that you have to unlock a lot of it by playing the missions and then earning a currency, and then you just kind of unlock the stuff. I don't even think you can buy it with real money. You have to like unlock it like a video game or something. There are a ton of different paint options. There's a ton of different armor options that you progressively unlock just via progression and playing more missions and doing better in the missions and stuff like that. So incentives to keep playing and getting familiar with the game and all that. And some of these look really good. Some of the armor pieces look really cool. There is a DLC like thing, like a DLC pack of cosmetic items. I'm okay with that existing. My one problem is that the one fucking paint I want is in the DLC pack. I have mentioned before my own homebrew chapter. You can call them homebrew. I've kind of like adopted them. The Steel Confessors. Their main color is like a chrome or reflective silver, and that is in the DLC pack. God damn it! I have to use shitty Space Wolves colors to even get it kind of close. I hate Space Wolves. So it's kind of annoying to me. So until like, I don't know, there's a price drop or some way to earn that besides it. I don't know. I've just been grinding. I was grinding co-op missions so that I could unlock all the parts of the Iron Hand, so I could just make Iron Hands instead, because I love me some Iron Hands. But yeah, the customization options are great. They're very fleshed out. There's lots of different... There's a pretty good amount of different patterns you can get on your armor. Nothing like crazy, like add a bunch of polka dots or anything like that. But you can do like half tones, you know? You can do like one side is black, one side is yellow. You can customize like the Aquila to be a different shade and all that. You can add little stripes and stuff to different armor pieces. You can edit like the left legs and the left arms and the right legs and the right arms separately. It's all very nice. I have not touched the PvP yet, although I kind of want to. It looks fun. I want to play my Night Lords. Overall, it's just like, I don't know. It's just kind of like a very solid It's a solid, fun game that is very focused, and if you're interested in what it's doing, it has a lot for you. It has a lot for you, and it does it very competently. If you're a Warhammer fan, I would totally recommend it. It is just a real treat to be able to walk around. Like, I keep saying it, but fuck, I just love walking around in like a battle barge. It's so cool. It's so cool, dude. There are some really cool. The last boss of this game is great. It's really fun. Like, I want to play it again. It makes me want to play it again because the last boss is really good. The mechanics that they added do so well it gives them enough flexibility to create some really interesting boss encounters. There's only like one or two that I would really consider bosses, but they are really cool. I mean, it's not terribly complex. It does a very small amount of things very well. I would give Space Marine a thumbs up. My only gripes are the load times and the fact that the DLC is a little pricey. It's like $40 or something. Like, what the fuck? Or like $50 like for cosmetics? It's like a little too pricey, to be honest, for what they're offering. I wish that you could just buy the paints individually. Fuck it, I'd buy... If you could just sell a paint for $2, fuck, I'd buy it. I'd buy that individually. I wouldn't mind. That's... I don't know. I had a good time with it. I'll probably play some of it later on. Again, just the fucking load times. But yeah. When am I ever going to wrap something up cleanly? I've always got more thoughts to attack on. But not anymore, because I'm going to draw this to a close. I'm pretty hungry, and I want to make food for myself. If you've been listening this far, thank you for listening to me ramble. If you have a question, feel free to leave it down in the comments below, but please phrase it in the form of a question, because I'm not just going to read your thoughts out loud. I'll be back next week to talk about some other nonsense, and hopefully this stupid video will be out soon. I feel like I've kind of hit my stride on it at this point. It's a passion project now. You'll see. You'll see. And I hope everyone has a good time. Patreon, and I have a coffee and all that.